Well, welcome. This is our fourth study in the book of James. I encourage you to open your Bibles. We're in chapter 1. We're taking a look at James in a little bit different way, in which we're hoping to learn how to take our faith that James talks about and take it to the streets. Take it to people that need to know that there's hope, that they need to know that God is there for them. They need to know that there is a plan for their lives, that life isn't chaos, life isn't chance, life isn't accidental, that there's somebody behind the wheel, there's somebody driving the bus. And I know I've been on a school bus one time when one of our coaches was driving, and we were wondering if there was anybody driving the bus. But it's a scary thing to go through life thinking that there's nobody in control. And so we are glad and thankful to know that God is in control and that He wants us to take that message out to the streets. You might remember in verses 2 through 4, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Note here that he refers to tests and trials. Basically, he's calling them the same thing, that your faith can be tested, your faith can go through a trial, but it's the same thing. And that the purpose of those tests is to produce steadfastness, that you can be complete in the Lord, lacking nothing. We ended last week with verse 12, where he ended with this: "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him." And so, Here again, he's talking about persevering through trial, persevering through testing, because God has something in store for us. Now he changes tune a little bit, beginning with verse 13, and that's where we're going to begin tonight. "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one." A lot of people feel like when they're going through trials, when they're going through testing, that it's God tempting them, that they're being tempted to fail. There are some people who picture God as the spiritual referee or umpire with his hand on the flag, just waiting to penalize us, waiting for us to stumble and fall. But that's not what the Scripture says. God doesn't tempt anyone. He tests us, but He doesn't tempt us. So, my question for you is, testing or temptation, what's the difference? What's the difference between being tested or tempted? Now, I'm going to ask for a show of hands. You don't have to say what it was. But if you at some point in your life feel that you have personally been tested, raise your hand. Okay? Now, if you have at some point in your life feel that you have personally been tempted, raise your hand. Okay? Now, do you find that in your mind, when I ask you those two questions, you went to the same event? Does anybody have?
Can you have a scripture on testing?
Yes, the first 12 verses of James. James 1 through 12.
So you don't have no particular verse?
Verse 12, verses 2 through 4. And sometimes in our minds we go to the same thing. And let's look at maybe what a difference is. Well, first of all, let me ask you, what is the difference between testing and tempting? Gary?
I said who they're offered from.
Who they come from? The source, okay. That's one difference. What's another difference? Any ideas? Okay. Temptation a lot of times involves something harmful to you. Okay. That's definitely true. We know that when Satan tempts us, it's definitely to our harm. Absolutely. Any other ideas?
Temptation has you have a weakness in you that you could easily be tempted.
Okay. Temptation exposes a weakness within you. Okay, Randy, did you have one?
Well, they're so closely related that, being tempted would probably involve some kind of sin, and tested would be your degree of endurance or your ability to withstand that temptation. So it's like a measure of
Okay.
spiritual strength.
Okay. Randy said, if you couldn't hear him, that testing involves endurance, being able to withstand something, being able to get through something, whereas temptation often involves sin, that there's something about it that is calling you to sin. Glenn?
Job is a good example of testing. He wasn't tempted by God or anybody, but he was tested.
Okay. Okay. He was tested. Job was severely tested, I think you would have to say. And many of us may have gone through something similar, unfortunately. Job lost his children. We've had members here that have lost children.
God used Satan himself.
Okay? God allowed Satan to provide the means for the testing. That's absolutely right. And so we see a lot of testing and temptation in the life of Job. Well, let me read this to you. I found a little bit of humor in this. This is that comic strip, Calvin and Hobbes. His teacher says, Calvin, your test was an absolute disgrace. The answers that show that you didn't read the material. Our first president was not Chef Boyardee. You ought to be ashamed of the answers that you turned in, such preposterous answers. And he looks at his test and he says, I just don't test well. How many of us feel like when we've gone through a test that we could look up at God and say, I just don't test well. I don't do this well. God, please don't do this again. Don't test me. I don't make it through them. A word on temptation. How many of you have seen something like this? Temptation, a lot of times, often involves something you're not supposed to do, doesn't it? Here is a button that says, do not push button. Have any of y'all ever seen that in a company where you work? That they'll have something that says, do not push the button. Or, we've got back on our copier, I don't know, Lisa or Karen, somebody wrote on there, do not turn off the copier. I remember there was one place I worked at a bank, they had a big valve thing up, and it had this valve wheel, and it said, do not turn. And you think, why is it there? And I watched, there was an old movie back, Joe versus the Volcano, once, and he gets fired, he's leaving the company, and so he walks over there and he turns the wheel. And he says, that's it? It doesn't do anything? All these years I've wanted to do that, and it doesn't do anything. Temptation involves a lot of times something we shouldn't do. And like it was mentioned, it's something that's often to our detriment. I'm going to give you an analogy to give you an idea of what testing really is and compare it to what temptation really is. And I'm going to do it by something I have a lot of experience in. My sons and I, when they were young and at home, we took Taekwondo for many years. And we started out taking Taekwondo as something that they wanted to do. They didn't get to play baseball. There wasn't a little league in our. They didn't have a band at the school that they went to. So there was a Taekwondo class that they could do. So we went in, and they wanted me to do it with them. And I thought, well, this is a good father-son activity, so we did this. And we started out, we were in the basics, you know, we learned how to stretch. Now, let me tell you, we didn't stretch that good our first class. We had to go through some classes and some period of time before we were able to do the stretching. But once we passed the stretching, we went on, and then he taught us how to do push-ups and how to do sit-ups and how to do all of these exercises in calisthenics, and so many push-ups and so many sit-ups. And you can see some of them have a little bit better position than some of the others. Do we have any military people who know how to do military push-ups? I bet you know that there's a little bit of, what do you call that, curve that's not supposed to be there in proper form. But we had to do all of these exercises and had to learn all of these things. Then once we had gone through this process, we began to learn what's called forms or katas. They're the actual movements that you may have seen. If you watched The Karate Kid when that movie series was popular, you saw him learning from Mr. Miyagi. He learned katas or movements. And then you take your movements and then you put them together and you make a series of movements, which we call forms or pumse. And so you learn to do that. Then the next step in your progression is you learn to do techniques. You learn to do kicking. This is what all that stretching's about. Because I guarantee you when I first went in, I couldn't kick that high. Your kneecaps were in danger, but not much else. But we learn to do these techniques, and we learn to develop them. And then we go on and we learn to do sparring, which takes all of what you have learned and puts it into one event. And as we were going through this, we went through it about a year in this process to where we learned these things. We found out that, you know, when we go to class, you line up. And we were always at the back of the class. And we began to notice that people wore different color belts. And these belts that they had on they start white. We had a white belt, then they go to a yellow belt, and then white belt with a yellow tip, and the yellow belt, then a yellow belt with a green tip, and then a green, and it goes on. We found out that they have these different belts, and these belts signify ranks as you go through the Taekwondo system, from white belt, which is the beginning, all the way up to black belt. And each of these colors has a significant meaning to the students. And not only do you do the physical work in Taekwondo, there's a lot of actual written work that we had to do in studying and learning about these things and about the meaning of all of these things. Then we found out after we had been there about a year, there was something we had to do called a belt test. And, you know, I don't know what a belt test is. And so he told us that we had to know these certain things. We had to write a written test. We had to take a physical test on doing how many push-ups we could do, how many sit-ups we could do. We had to meet a certain standard. We had to do our forms, and we had to do some sparring to pass our belt test. And one of the things that we learned during this testing process is that getting to the next belt level, belts were earned. They were never given. You didn't get the next belt just because you've been going for a year and paying your dues or your class fees. You had to pass the test to be able to move on to the next belt. And during this whole process, of which we were in for several years, and my oldest son and I did progress from the white belt to the black belt. We took all of those tests along the way. These are some lessons that we learned that there's spiritual application to how we go through testing in our lives. The first thing I learned in Taekwondo is testing is a privilege. It's not a right. You don't get to test. You don't walk up to your instructor and say, I want to test. I kind of think that red belt's pretty cool. I want a red belt. So I want to test for that. It doesn't work. You are invited to test. The instructor tells you when you have reached a certain point where he believes you are prepared and ready to test. So testing is a privilege. Why do you think God chooses to test us? Is it because he thinks that we're not ready? Or is it because God knows that we're ready? That God knows that we can handle what is fixing to come, that with his help we can get through that test, and that we can not only survive the test, but we can actually learn from the test, something that we can apply. The next thing I found out is testing is for your benefit. How many of you ever took a math test in school? Did you ever feel like a math test was for your benefit? I always thought it was the teacher's revenge. I mean, she'd had a root canal the day before and was in a bad mood, so she came in and said, "We're having a test today." And it just felt like there was just no way I was ever going to pass because she designed it to make it unpassable. And I never realized that the testing was for my benefit. We're going to talk a little bit more about how testing is for our benefit and how when God tests us, it's for our benefit. I also found out that the instructor wants you to succeed. The instructor is not there to fail you. The instructor is not there to make sure that you don't pass. He's not there to try to keep you at a level so you keep coming and paying him money. That's not what he's there for. Because what does it say about the instructor if everybody fails his class? I'm sorry?
He didn't do his job.
He doesn't do his job. Isn't that right? Isn't that fair to say that he's not a very good teacher, not a very good instructor, if he can't successfully communicate to his students enough information and enough skills to help them grow and advance? God wants us to succeed. When you are given a test, it's not to see you fail. God's wanting to see you grow. He's wanting to see you learn new skills. He's wanting to see you learn new abilities. But more importantly, God is wanting you to have faith in him, and he's wanting you to have faith in yourself. He's wanting you to know that you can go beyond what you ever thought or imagined as long as he is with you. I found out in Taekwondo in testing that successful completion of a test allows you to move on to learn more. One of the things in Taekwondo about these levels is you didn't learn the next forms or you didn't learn the next series of skills or moves until you had passed the previous level. And so I would watch some of these red belts. When I was a white belt, I watched some of these red belts and black belts do the skills that they had learned and all the things that they got to do. And I wanted to do that. But I couldn't get there because I hadn't passed the levels in between. I didn't have the knowledge that I needed. Hadn't done the physical preparation to get to where they were, to be able to pass that test, to be at that level. But testing is to get me there. Testing is to show that now I'm ready to take on more. And this is almost an unfortunate, when God tests us and we successfully pass one of God's tests, is to show us we're ready for more. What does God say about, he says, to people that much is given, what does he say? Much more is going to be required. When God gives us something, he gives us to be used. He gives us to be used for his glory, for the benefit of his people. And when we're able to handle what he's given us, he's going to give us more. But when he gives us more is going to be required. And so testing allows us to be in a position to learn more. And this one I think is the most incredible one, is that successful completion of a test allows and motivates you to teach others. When I became from a white belt and I became a yellow belt, one of the things that I had to do was I had to teach the white belts what I had learned. And when I became a green belt, I began teaching the yellow belts and the white belts what I had learned. And all the way up, and when I became a black belt, I began teaching the class, the entire class. And so we were taught with the idea that the purpose of you being taught is to pass it on. You're to pass on what you have learned. Isn't that what we go through testing for? Is so that when we go through something, we're enabled. We see the power of God. We have faith in ourselves. We have faith that God is going to take us through it. That when we see somebody going through a test, that we can be there to say, you can do it. You can make it. There is hope. There is a way. And so all of these principles that apply to Taekwondo apply to why God tests us. He wants us to be successful. He wants us to be able to teach others. He wants us to receive all the benefits that are inherent in his testing. And I'm going to read this statement to you. This is something a black belt tester, a 5th degree black belt, wrote. For every 10,000 people that join a martial arts academy, half will drop out in the first 6 months. So 5,000 drop out first 6 months. Of those remaining students, about 1,000 will complete a year and then quit. 500 will probably make it 2 years, but only 100 students out of 10,000 will make it to their 3rd anniversary. On average, less than 20 will get their first Dan, and less than 5 get to their 2nd Dan. That's the step right before black belt. And he said, I shall go on to teach others, no matter how long the student is at the academy, the lessons they learn will be with them for the rest of their life, and they will go on to share that life with others. Even, no matter how long they've been here, they've got something to share. They've got a story. They've got lessons that they can benefit the world. They can make the world a better place because of their experience here. This person is a black belt. This person is 1 in 10,000. Are you the one? 1 out of 10,000 students will ever reach the level of black belt. And they're the ones that have the courtesy, integrity, perseverance, self-control, and this is the ultimate quality of the black belt, is the indomitable spirit, the never quit. You know, when Levi was up here talking his lesson, I said, he's looked at my notes. Don't quit. That's the whole idea of the black belt, is that indomitable spirit that no matter what happens, you don't give up. You keep trying. Now, we talked about testing. That's testing that can come about. But what about temptations? During a test, a temptation can arise. After a test, a temptation can arise. What kind of temptation can arise? Well, the very obvious one is what? Quit. Have you ever gone through, you know, a lot of you raised your hands and said that you have been tested. Were you tempted to quit? Were you tempted to give up and say, I don't know that I can do this? How many of you that have been married 50, 60, 70 years ever had a time in your life when your marriage was going through a test and you said, I don't know if I can do this? I don't know if we're going to be able to make it, but then you did. You endured, you kept going, you kept fighting, you kept loving. The temptation to quit is profound. This one quote says, I tried, it was hard, I quit, the end, story of my life. Dr. Phil has a famous quote when he's talking to people on his shows, and he did this in his counseling session. He says, "How is this a mirror to your life?" Somebody talks about, well, I got in this situation and I just quit. I walked away. How is that a mirror to your life? If quitting is your favorite style when you're tested or tempted, it reflects in every area of your life. Abraham Lincoln said, "You cannot fail unless you quit." As long as you're striving, as long as you're trying, you're still succeeding. Failure is when you give up. Matthew 7:13-14, I talked about how few make it to a black belt. Let me show you the spiritual application. Matthew 7:13-14 says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life." And what does it say? Those who find it are few. The people that are willing to stick with God, to have faith in Him, to believe that He is going to see them through the trials, the testing, the temptations, unfortunately are few. But God is calling us all to reach out, to increase that number. The Voice puts it this way, and I really like this. Don't like this translation for a lot, but this passage I think he had nailed. There are two paths before you. You may take only one path. One doorway is narrow, another door is wide. Go through the narrow door, for the wide door leads to a wide path, and the wide path is broad. The wide path is easy. The wide, broad, easy path has many, many people on it. But the wide, broad, easy, crowded path leads to death. Now, then at that narrow door leads to a narrow road that in turn leads to life. It's hard to find that road, and not many people find it. Staying faithful is hard. But Jesus tells us in the Holy Spirit in Revelations 2:10, "Be faithful unto death, and you will receive the crown of life." Through testing, through temptation. Another temptation that I came up with as we go through trials is the blame game. You ever wanted to blame somebody when you're going through a trial? That it's not your fault that you're going through this. You didn't have anything to do with it. It's his fault, her fault, their fault, not mine, not me. I have no personal responsibility in what's going on. I had somebody this week tell me, "I wouldn't go to church. I used to be a preacher's kid. The church is full of hypocrites." Saying the church is full of hypocrites and refusing to go to church because it's full of hypocrites is like going to the gym, not going to the gym because there's a lot of out-of-shape people there. Not going to the hospital because there's sick people there. We can't blame others for our failure to go through tests, our failure to make it through temptations. Another quote that I like is, "When you blame others, you give up the power to change yourself." When you blame others, you've given them all the power. They say that they control me. They decide what I do. They decide if I make it or not. They decide whether I am successful or not. I'm going to blame them. So where does temptation come from? Where does it come from? Obviously, Satan. From the very beginning in the garden, when he appeared as the serpent and tempted Eve, and sometimes, like this drawing says, we feel like Satan's right there whispering in our ear and tempting us to do what's wrong. Obviously, that is a place where temptation comes. You are of the father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Satan wants to deceive us. He wants to lie to us. He wants to tempt us. But he's not the only place where temptation comes from. Does temptation come from relationships? Can we have relationships? What did Eve do when she sinned? She turned around and gave the fruit to Adam. She tempted him. Sometimes I've had people when we're studying, they say, well, I can't because my husband, my wife, my parent, my mother, my father, they won't accept me anymore if I become a Christian. They won't follow God. This relationship is more important to me than following God. Or it may be a friend that can lead us into temptation. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. I like this quote. He says, I asked God to protect me from my enemies, and lo and behold, I started losing friends. How good of friends were they? If they really were bringing you down spiritually. 2 Peter 2:12-19 talks about these people, these evil companions. He calls them creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed, reveling in their deceptions while they feast with you. In other words, they're partying with you. They want you to come and participate in all these things. Their eyes are full of adultery, insatiable for sin. They entice unsteady souls. People that are going through trials, people that are going through testing, people that are going through temptation. Their world may have been rocked. They're unsteady. And these relationships can be used to entice us and take us to their place, to their father. They follow the way of Balaam of Beor, who loved gain from wrongdoing. These are waterless springs and mist driven by a storm. Remember in the first part of James we talked about a double-minded person, that they're driven by anything, any teaching or doctrine. They have no power to control themselves. For speaking loud boasts of folly, they entice by sensual passions of the flesh those who are barely escaping from those who live in error. It says if you get away from these people, you're lucky, because you're those that barely escape. These evil companionships can provide a great source. They promise freedom, but they themselves are full of corruption. Another place temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. These desires give birth to sinful action. When sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. Verses 14-15 of James 1. I want what I want when I want it. Freddie Mercury. I want it all, and I want it now. I know exactly what I want, and I'm going to get what I want. That's what the world tells us. That's what our bodies tell us. Our own sinful desires and lusts tell us, I want what I want it now, and I'm going to get it no matter what. Where does temptation come from? But when people are tempted, when their own evil desire leads them away and traps them, we need to look at the man, the woman in the mirror, because that's where the greatest temptations come from within. Be tested and not tempted. A test reveals your strength, whereas temptation shows your weakness. Thank you, Dee Dee. You brought that point to us earlier. Then desire, when it's conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully grown, leads forth to death. So what do we do when we have fallen during times of temptation? We failed. We failed the test. We made a mistake. We stumbled. We sinned. What do? We've hit rock bottom. What are we going to do? Paul talks about this in Romans 17. The trouble with me is I am all too human, a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know what I'm doing is wrong, this shows that I agree that the law is good. So I am not the one doing wrong. It is sin that is living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me. That is my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I'm not the one that's really doing it. It is sin that is living in me that does it. And I've discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart, but there's another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to sin, and that is still within me. And so what is his conclusion? Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Paul says, I failed. The power isn't in me. I don't have the ability to save myself. Who will save me? Thank God the answer is Jesus Christ our Lord. Do not be deceived, my brothers. Every good and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Out of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth. When's another time the word forth is used in the Bible? What did Jesus say at the tomb of Lazarus? Lazarus, come forth. What is Jesus saying to us when we're in the tomb of sin? Come forth. That we should be a kind of fruit, the first fruits of his creatures. Jesus was the first fruit from the grave. He wants us to be the first fruit of his creature. Finally, I want to end with this. I had my black belt test. The final test, I had to break boards. Hadn't broken these kind of boards before. Had to break them by kicking, had to break them by punching. And I had broken one board, I'd broken 2 boards. Black belt test, 5 boards. Never broken 3 boards, 4 boards, much less 5 boards. I couldn't do it. I tried again and again and again, and I couldn't do it. The instructor did this for me. He said, okay, let's put the boards down. Let's get your technique back where it's supposed to be. Get you doing what you know to do. He put up a piece of paper. He had me kick the piece of paper. Had me punch the piece of paper. I did it again and again. He said again and again and again, and I did it. And I did it the 6th time. And what I didn't know is he put the boards behind the paper. I broke the boards. He helped me through it. I didn't believe I could. He knew I could. No temptation has overcome you that is common to man. God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted above which you're able to bear, but with the temptation also provide the way of escape that you may endure it. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound. In every circumstance, I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. Paul says, I know how to be tested. I've been tested. I've been tried. I've been tempted. And this is what it comes down to. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Thank you.